we built something called reference tracking, where if the model actually suggests code that is a verbatim match or similar match to what is out there, we attribute the source as well. The same thing happened when we also started thinking about the data that is used.
Where exactly are you all training data from if it's not coming from the users?
There is 3-4 different facets of the data set that we have. All of that is bundled into how we do this as well.
Okay. Srini Iragavarapu is a director of generative AI applications and developer experiences at Amazon Web Services with over 20 years of industry experience. Srini leads software engineering for Amazon Q Developer, a generative AI-powered software development assistant that accelerates and improves how organizations and developers, including Amazon.com, build applications. He previously led teams for Amazon SageMaker Inference and Amazon Supply Chain Optimization. He holds an MBA from the University of Washington, go Dogs, by the way, and a bachelor's degree in computer science from Andhra University. Srini lives here in Seattle with his wife, Jo, a senior program manager with Amazon Digital Product Development and Customer Experience, and their 9-year-old son. So Srini, thank you so much for taking the time to chat.
Thanks, Connor. Thanks for having me on the show. Thanks. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah. So I think a good place to start is sort of a bit of a hot question. A lot of people are asking it all the time. And that's sort of like, what exactly are all of these AI things going to be doing to us as developers? Like, how is AI going to impact the tech industry? Not necessarily now, but say 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the line. Like, are we eventually sort of inevitably going to be replaced by AI? There just be no more software developers, or will there be less software developers? Or potentially does the opposite happen, right? Where there's more software developers because we're able to build all of these new things that we couldn't be doing before.
First of all, thank you very much for having me on the show. My name is Srini Iragavarapu. I'm the Director of Software Engineering for Amazon Q Developer. To the question that you just asked, I think just like how every technical revolution that has happened over decades and decades, AI is also going through the similar revolution with generative AI and other techniques too, where the tasks that developers have been doing are shifting from one kind to another. Like back in the day when I was learning software engineering, I actually learned how to do punch cards. I never really had to do it for my job though, but I actually learned how to do punch cards. And then it moved. By the time I actually started working, the world has changed where I started coding, building applications. Now with AI, with the technology that we have through Amazon Q Developer and tools like that, what kind of tasks you perform for what roles is what is changing, which means developers are going to become more productive and you'll start building more creative applications for the customers. That's how I see it evolving.
If developers become more productive, from like the company perspective, do you think the result will be companies saying, well, our developers are doing twice as much, so therefore we need half as many? Or is the result going to be companies say, well, our developers can do twice as much, let's build twice as much stuff?
In fact, as technology, like if you really remember the cassette tapes and when we had to rewind cassette tapes, and now
rewind.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like we had to do it with the pencils. That's how I used to do it. And CDs and DVDs right now, we're actually listening to a lot more music than what it used to be the case. In the same way, as the focus moves from where I'm figuring out how to write code to what the logic is that I'm trying to solve for the customers, the kind of applications that we're going to build for the customers is going to change and evolve. So there is going to be more use cases, connectivity across the board. And that's how I see evolve.
Gotcha. As far as like right now, rather than the future, what do you think AI code assistants, whether it be Q Developer or all of the other ones out there, are actually useful for like at this moment? And how are you primarily seeing your customers using them? And then what is sort of the end goal though? Like, what are they using them for right now? What are like specific applications? And what do you see people using them for in the future? Like, what would you want to see?
I'll actually use this opportunity to how we've been thinking about Q Developer in the last few years as we evolved into the journey and learned from customers as well. We started with coding assistant and inline coding assistant a couple of years ago. We started using it internally. We started using through customers, got a lot of feedback. And as we get into feedback, then we realized software development is not just about only coding. There is other pieces and facets to software development lifecycle,
right?
Whether it's unit tests, whether it's code maintenance, whether it's actually debugging your code and actually writing your code as well.
Yeah.
Amazon Q Developer right now is designed to be helping with multiple steps of software development lifecycle. And that's how we started evolving Q Developer in the ways we're doing this. So Q Developer right now has like the best acceptance rates in terms of code generated. It has industry-leading code scanning capabilities, which means it generates very secure and performant code as it generates code as well. And then also recently we talked about how internally it has helped us migrate Java applications. So one of the features that Amazon Q Developer has is code transformation. We can upgrade Java applications from one version to another.
Okay.
So the feature that is supported right now is Java 8 and Java 11 to Java 17 upgrades. Okay. And I'll quickly show you a demo of how this works. Let me go grab my laptop. So in here, I have a very basic demo application. This one is a movie-based Java 1.8 app microservice that lists out free movies. All the movies are stored in the config service for AWS.
Okay.
So I'm going to use Q Developer to actually go upgrade this to the later version.
Okay.
This will take some time because think of it as an agent where it goes through your code base, understands your code, then figures out what libraries need to get updated. Okay. It's not just a pure, I'll upgrade the lines of code. Yes. It actually looks at your dependencies too.
Okay.
So there is transform. And it's actually now kind of looking at, it says, oh, I found out that this is a microservice in the version that you have. Do you want me to start upgrading? And then it'll kick it off. This is going to take some time, and we can continue the conversations. I'll let it run through.
Okay.
What it is actually going through is building your application. It is understanding what dependencies there are, because that is, I think, the biggest piece of the puzzle, not just code.
Yeah.
If you have log4j, JUnit, older versions, which one should I upgrade it to and what code changes need to happen? So I'll let it run as we are continuing the conversation as well.
Okay.
This kind of takes around 10, 15 minutes for this application that I have.
Okay.
I should be able to do this. So the reason I showed you this particular example is we internally use the same for Amazon's Java applications. So
we are actually in use right
Yes.
now.
Oh, absolutely. Like we're a Java shop. There is thousands and thousands of Java applications that Amazon has. We upgraded 30,000 Java applications in production using the Q Transform agent and deployed them to production too. We estimate saving around 4,500 years of software engineering. Like if you remember, in the olden days, the way you do this is you would assign this to a team and say, please upgrade, let's go test it, and then do the whole drill. That world has changed. That's what we're able to do. $260 million of annualized savings every year because of performance upgrade and because of the savings as well.
And that's a job that most software engineers do not want to be tasked with. It's
Spot
not
on.
exactly a fun role to have. So one question of that though is how consistent is it, right? Like, does it make mistakes that a human wouldn't make? Does it make any mistakes at all? Obviously, if you have years worth of human developer time, you're going to make mistakes with humans doing it too. But is it better, worse than the human version, or is it sort of the same result essentially that you get with humans doing it?
For Q Developer, in fact, one of the other agents that we have, we call it the software development agent, which if you use Q Developer, you use a /dev command and you can provide it with tasks to be able to operate on multiple files and multiple repos. In there, we recently reimagined how our agent works. In fact, we refreshed of sorts. That's an update, engineering update that's sent out. Earlier, compared to now, we are able to do 51% more issue resolutions. So we use a public data set called SweBench. SweBench actually it has a set of GitHub issues with how you, and that's a data set that software folks use to evaluate how this works. The latest agent actually can solve 51% more issues than what we had when we GA'd. The point I'm trying to get to is, think of it as a software engineer right next to you.
Yeah.
As you called out, even if there are two software engineers pair programming, there is always going to be discussions back and forth, and there's a buggy code and then there is a right code and discussion. We kind of think of Q and Q agents as the same, where you can now tell the agent, in fact, after the migration is done, if you're not happy with the migration or if you want more from the agent, you can actually tell Amazon Q Developer and say, wait, I have more instructions for you. Why can't you go fix it? And then come back to me as well. Gotcha. And that's how we are thinking about it.
Gotcha. So when you did this migration at Amazon, did you have humans review the code as well, or was it all just automatically done by Q Developer and merged?
Yeah, so in this case in Amazon, there was humans in the loop, obviously, because you migrate the code. And this is almost analogous to how we do it even without the systems. Right. Somebody migrates it, you assign it to the team,
looks at it.
and then they code review it, and then they deploy it, test it, and make sure production applications are running fine. It's the same process, only that we removed the undifferentiated, very boring kind of tasks away from the software engineers so that they could do better things.
Awesome. So with Q Developer, obviously it exists in like this ecosystem of a ton of different AI coding assistants, and oftentimes there's sort of a first mover bias of everybody knows what ChatGPT is because it came first. For sort of the mainstream public, it was even their first introduction to AI at all for a lot of people. And with coding assistants, it was sort of ChatGPT online, and then GitHub Copilot was sort of the first major one that seemed to start getting some traction. So where does Q Developer sort of fit into this ecosystem? And do you see these tools sort of being used together, or is it simply we're all out at it to make the absolute best coding assistant? And if so, like, what does Amazon do to sort of differentiate itself from these other tools that have just a ton of market share just because they released first?
There are three parts to this question. I'll break it down into three chunks. The first one is what I always say, this is the classic DNA of Amazon that is so inherent to us. Security, being able to, responsible AI, because this is an AI tool, even otherwise, service availability. These are all in our DNA. We naturally think about it all the time. That is, I think, the biggest differentiator for independent of whether it's Amazon Q or anything else. That's one. The second is how we brought in responsible AI within Amazon Q Developer. When we launched Q Developer, two things that we did very different from how anything exists was what we call reference tracker, because these are based on the large language models that are trained in open source data. We built something called reference tracking, where if the model actually suggests code that is a verbatim match or similar match to what is out there, we attribute the source as well. So we're not just saying, I'm generating it, hey, Amazon Q Developer is generating it. We're actually attributing to the author, and that's coming in. And you as a developer can choose to use it or not use it. The same thing happened when we also started thinking about the data that is used within, and you as a developer is using. You're coding and you're using Q Developer, code is IP. We said, absolutely, that is something that we will not use for training our models, and that is something that we will not collect at all. That was another one of those very conscious choices where we had to make. The third, tied to the responsible AI, is, we built in the usual bias toxicity filters because code has all of that as well. We bundled something called code scanning as part of Q Developer. So you as a developer don't have to go do something different. Once you generate the code, it is already packaged and bundled in for scanning code. So any security vulnerabilities or performance issues are actually already built in. That packaging and how we've been thinking about this problem, because developers, we don't think of it as only coding. I think that is important. The third differentiator is how we are bundling it. Like Bedrock is a platform that provides you with a lot of large language models. I'm like right now all the way from Meta to Anthropic to A2IM. We use that plus a scaffolding is what I call it, which is the program analysis and automated reasoning that we've learned over decades of our own code building and application building. Both of those packaged together is what the developer is actually getting. And we're not thinking of only code generation. Let's look at software development lifecycle. Testing, debugging, deploying, tracking, troubleshooting. So Q Developer is helping in every little task possible as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's something I've told people a lot when I was asked how I'm using different AI tools and how people should be using them. It's I don't really use them that much for writing the actual code, because oftentimes it's really, as you get more experience, not the hardest part of the whole process or the longest part. I use it for writing a lot of test cases. I use it to check my work. I use it sort of almost for idea generation sometimes. Hey, I need to build this system. What things do you think I should be considering? And every now and then the AI tools will come up with something that I just didn't think of. So you mentioned also not training on the user's code, which I think is super important, right? If you're a big tech company and you want to be a customer of Q Developer, any AI tool, you probably don't want them training on your code just because that is your IP. What is your approach, though, to training data? Because I know there's a lot of sort of different opinions on what should or shouldn't be trained on, whether it be stuff from the internet, paid resources, free things online. Like, where exactly are you all training data from if it's not coming from the users?
So there is 3-4 different facets of the data set that we have. One is the open source data that you can actually train on with all the licensing. And that's why we have the reference tracker where we say, not only do we train it, but we will make sure that we attribute if you have the licensing set up that way.
Yeah, I noticed that the first time I used it. I liked that feature a lot.
Yes.
I remember mentioning that.
That is one data set. Then we also have obviously synthetic data that we generate. And then there is tons of our own internal data that we have in terms of what can be used. Obviously not our IP is going into the training data set, but the data that we have, that we've built over decades of experience of software engineering, all of that is bundled into how we do this as well.
Okay, so a lot of it's coming from things that Amazon has sort of built up over the years, even before this project existed.
Yes.
Okay, that's interesting, because it does sort of give Amazon some level of competitive advantage just in the fact that they've been doing work essentially towards this for so long, even if that wasn't the end goal of it. So what about things online that are not, like if something's on GitHub and it has an open source license and you can attribute it, like that's awesome. What about things online like Stack Overflow answers or things that are free online, but I think different people have different opinions of if they are free just for individual use, or are they free for training AI models on?
There is 2 pieces to this, but the first one is they're very actually careful about, even for location, like not just GitHub, but other places that you're talking about, they all have different licensing setup of what can be used and what can't be used. So as we went through this journey, or still going through this journey, something that we're very cognizant about is to follow that particular license setup. If they're restrictive, then we're absolutely not going to use it in any part of our software development as well. Yeah. And that is something that we are very cognizant about.
Cool. And I guess another question is, these AI models need so much data, and obviously you can't by hand go through every possible bit of data that's going to go into the training. So how do you ensure that what it's being trained on is actually accurate? And then sort of as an end user, I think one of my biggest issues with all of the different AI tools is trusting them and getting to a point where I don't feel like I have to basically redo the work it did in a super long code review or reviewing whatever it did, because I don't necessarily trust the AI to be as good as like a human developer. So I guess there's sort of 2 sides to that of, one, like, is that reasonable? Like, should I as a developer not really trust these AI tools? And how do we get to a point where we are actually trusting them? And then what are y'all doing to mitigate that risk of the AI either being trained on just incorrect data or spitting out incorrect information as a output?
I think I mentioned, like, there is the models, and then there is a scaffolding piece of it too, which is where I think a lot of the trick comes in handy. So we do, as data goes in, like when you're using QDeveloper in the IDE, there is input processing that happens, and then there is output processing that we do as well. All the way from bias toxicity filtering, PII removals, for example. Like, there is models that actually have data with PII in them. Your code in your IDE could have PII in it as well. We filter it out. Even when generation, we filter it out too, in terms of how that works. And the same applies to all the scanning capabilities that I just talked about. As we are improving the service and the models are becoming powerful, like, again, this goes back to us thinking that we want to democratize all of AI, generative AI for the world. Yeah. Bedrock, that's the whole existence of it, is we've heard from customers, multiple customers now adopting us, where their acceptance rates, the lines of code that they're actually accepting and ingesting into their repos. There's companies like British Telecom that said, wait, we have generated hundreds of thousands of lines of code after we adopted QDeveloper. Their acceptance rates, because you prototype it, they've actually all prototyped and tested if it works for them. We've shown improvements. And then with National Australian Bank, for example, they're accepting up to 50% of the code that we generate. And this is the developers actually using it in-house to be able to do this. So I think to the earlier point that I said, where the agents are getting more powerful and we are spending the time to make sure we evaluate it, and the trustworthiness that Amazon has is a combo for you as a developer to adopt QDeveloper and then start using it as well.
Gotcha. So what challenges do you think exist now between getting from where we currently are and sort of the end goal that you've described a few times? Like, is it an issue of compute, like we just need lots and lots of GPUs, or is it an issue of data? Like, are we at some point where we're running out of data to train on and we need more data to make these tools more intelligent? Or what do you see as like the biggest roadblocks between where we are right now and where we want to be 5-10 years from now?
All of these and above, more as well. Like there is compute, there is data, there is the use cases. I think that's the most important one too. For me, developers, like, my own developers, in fact, I'll give you some examples of how my own team, the team that I'm on, use Q Developer.
Yeah.
They come up with very creative ways of using it, which kind of always amuse me as well. But figuring out how to help and where to help the developer and assist, improve the developer productivity, I think is the biggest issue right now. Like compute, like, it's going to get cheaper. Data is going to become available, or we'll figure out synthetic data as well. But what problems are you solving for the customer? And that's why we said, let's focus on unit tests. Let's focus on the code transformations that we talked about earlier as well. So each of those use cases, and actually adding value, not for the sake of doing it, is probably going to be the bigger challenge.
Yeah, I like that approach a lot, because I do think there's a lot of these AI tools I've seen that seem to take the approach of like, we just want to build this AI that can do everything, and it's oftentimes lacks focus. And I'm like, just give me something specific that it can do and tell me how it's going to make that process better. And I think sort of going for the things that developers don't really want to do and that are also the least likely to make mistakes is a good starting place with unit tests and things like that.
Two of the examples, in fact, because you said that's how you're using Q Developer or these tools as well. One of the developers on my team, she said, I'm actually using Q Developer to draw sequence diagrams. And I'm like, wait, we don't support sequence diagram generation in Q Developer. The way she does it, she actually has a JSON to sequence diagram plugin.
Okay.
And then she uses Q to update the JSON based on the code. And the sequence diagram gets updated. And that's a very, very creative way of actually. So I think going back to what you just said, right? The developer gets to decide how they want to use it in their workflow, and being able to help in each of these steps is probably interesting.
Cool. So one other major question I see coming up a lot, I've seen on one end, Mark Zuckerberg's talked about it a lot in his opinion on open sourcing models, and I think they've open sourced a lot of their models. And on the other hand, a lot of people have talked about it being dangerous to open source AI models, or just being infeasible for one reason or another, whether it be protecting the IPs of the companies and all of that. So what's sort of your stance on that? Like, should we be open sourcing these models? Should we be open sourcing parts of them? Or where should we be landing?
For us, two things. One is democratize it. I mean, give the customers the choice what they want to do with it or not. And the customers are two facets, right? There is the users of these models, like folks on Bedrock. There are multiple applications being built. And when you go to Q Developer, which is an application itself that is built on a bunch of these models, follow some of the responsible AI tenets. And some as in all the way from the few things that are listed around how we do it across Amazon availability as well. I think as long as those two, and those are important, the rest is an optional exercise that any customer can actually pick and choose from.
Okay, that makes sense. Should we check on that?
Let me check on the, so like you can see, oh, there you go, it's actually done. So here, a quick step follow, so I can actually show you before I show you the diff. So here is the diff. What this actually did, it took the source, and you can see the steps. First, it updated the JDK version. Then it upgraded the deprecated code. It applied the code changes to make sure all the compilation errors are resolved. And then step 4 is where it finalized the code changes as well. So this is a fully migrated code right now that actually you should be able to see the entire diff.
Yeah, can you pull up like what
and if you see,
individual changes look?
Yes, it actually can. So for example, in this case, the lines in the code is 610 of them. It took 13 minutes. Planned dependencies replicated. So it replaced 6 of the 10 dependencies that need to be because of the versions. And then if you want to take a look at the diff.
Yeah.
So it actually walks you through, oh, wait, I'm supposed to add the base 64 and then it changed the encoding from the old version to the new version of how this needs to be done.
Okay.
And you can just accept all these changes one by one, and you're able to do this as well.
So this took what, 13 minutes?
30 minutes, yes.
Do you have an idea of like how long that would have taken, say, your average developer on your team if you were just like, hey, we need you to go migrate this Java application? Like, how long do you think that would have taken somebody to do?
This is probably a sprint's work, depending, of course, this depends on the repo size. In this case, this is a demo application, so I would say this. But I think going back to how in Amazon we've seen this, the 30,000 applications, we started small with a small group of production applications that happened. And we did a little bit of math around, if we were to do this like old school, what would it take? And that was the 4,500 years of software engineering saving.
Wow, that's a lot of time. To me, almost the bigger thing, aside from the time when you're at like Amazon scale and it saves millions and millions of dollars, is just allowing developers the freedom to not have to focus on things like this and to be focusing on the more creative aspects and the more sort of important high-level things rather than doing migrations. So pivoting a little bit towards some advice that you might have for people. A lot of my viewers are earlier in their careers. Some of them might be in college or at coding boot camps, things like that. I guess, first of all, a lot of them, I think, tend to be a little bit scared of AI, how disruptive it can be to the industry and eventually their job prospects. So what do you think these people should be doing to future-proof themselves, essentially? Like, what would you be doing if you were 21 right now in a computer science program and worried that you might not have a job in 10 years? Like, what would you be doing to prepare yourself?
The fun part of a computer science engineering is this is always evolving and the tech is evolving. In the last 20 years of my job, I started working on compilers. I worked on a little bit of front end. Now I'm working on AI applications. Then in between, I built backend services, both on-prem and off-prem as well. And that's the fun part about computer science engineering and understanding technology as it is. Adopting to AI as a tool to help you grow and learn, whether you use it for learning. Like, in fact, there is a new developer on the team, and she was like, I'm new to the code base. I'm using Q Developer to understand the code base, and that's all I'm using Q for right now, because all her focus is to learn it. Absolutely, that's what you should use it. There was another developer who was like, I was reading a PDF on a Mac, and apparently the PDF in the Mac did not have some bookmark functionality. He built his own little application using Q Developer to bookmark and read PDFs. And so the idea is to be able to use Q Developer and the tools that we provide you to help grow into your tasks and then learning the fundamentals as well. I think that's the big one.
Yeah, I really like the fundamentals thing, because oftentimes I get questions like, what programming language should I learn first or something like that? And I'm like, it doesn't matter. Like, you should learn fundamentals, and if you have good computer science fundamentals and good programming fundamentals, that'll lend itself to a career where you go from compilers to front ends to AI, because you understand computer science. You don't understand just Java or JavaScript or whatever it might be.
I actually learned Go after joining Amazon. Prior to that, I started, probably I'm aging myself now. I program in Fortran and Pascal as well. I learned Go. In fact, the funny part is the Kotlin extension for JetBrains that we have. The developer the developers who are working on the Kotlin extension for JetBrains use Q Developer in their regular coding as well, and they're learning and getting Kotlin too. So it's an iterative circle. But you're right, the fundamentals and this is the changing part is what makes it all fun and interesting.
Yeah. And I think AI is just like a super good tool just for learning. Like, even if you're not using it on a daily basis as a developer for like writing code or writing tests or whatever, it's an amazing tool for essentially looking things up. Like, traditionally we Google things, we go to Stack Overflow or whatever. And I think just using AI is oftentimes just as good, if not better, because you can get very specific answers to your questions. Like, so many times I've Googled something, I end up on Stack Overflow, and there's an answer that's like kind of similar to what I asked, but it's not exactly, and I'm not really sure how to convert it to what I asked, or it was some answer from 2005 and it's outdated, whereas I can ask AI and it can specifically answer my question. And I actually find that I think it's much, even if it's not perfect, it is And most of the AI tools tend to be much more consistent at answering those types of questions and sort of walking through how to learn something new than just like using old resources online can be. Aside from the AI front and how people should be using AI to learn and things like that, what other advice would you have, just as somebody who's had a successful long career in tech, for those younger people who are starting their careers or early in their career? And essentially, like if you were 18 or 19 right now and you were interested in computers, what's sort of the route you would take? Would you go get a computer science degree and go that route? Would you go like the boot camp route, or is there some other path that you would take?
The options these days are umpteen, like you called out. There is a lot of them. There is no one right path.
Yeah.
Whatever you're passionate about, there is, I have friends who are into gaming and they've been working in the gaming industry for a while. There is a few of my friends who are in the supply chain org in my team, and they love supply chain. The being able to solve delivery last mile problem is such an interesting science problem that they're able to do this. When I moved to the SageMaker org and the AI team here and trying to build these applications, trying to learn that was such an interesting exercise as well. So I think it also depends on what you're really passionate about and where you are. Should be open to change, which is what exactly happened in my world. Like I said, there's a compiler journey to on-prem to now AI services, which is completely a different world than I had to learn through this. So the key is use these tools. Some of them I'm like, especially the ones that, Q Developer and other similar tools as well. And then be ready to change and adopt, I think is the way. And to your point, the foundation pieces are very important as well. The fundamentals are really key.
Yeah, I think it's by far the most important thing for a lot of people. And what about for people who are a little bit like later into their careers, say they graduated college or a new grad at Amazon or wherever else, or maybe they're a mid-level developer or even a senior developer. Vast majority of software engineers never get past that senior level, whether it be by choice, that's sort of where they choose, like, I don't want more responsibility, or just by virtue of like not being able to progress. So what do you think are the things that helped you progress further through your career? And like, what are the things that people can do if they do want to get to that staff level, the principal, director type levels, or to management or any of these like higher levels?
I'll actually go back to some of the leadership principles we have at Amazon. Again, to your point, it's a choice that you make if you really want to progress or not. But as you're doing this, for us, the way we think about it is things like learn and be curious, things about deliver results. Like you're always tasked, whether you're a startup owner or whether you are working for a company or whether you're teaching, whatever it is, there is a set of deliverables that you have.
Yeah.
You have to continue delivering them. Owning, I think, is the other piece too. Ownership is what we call in the leadership principle, where it's your problem to solve for the customer.
Yeah.
And the last one, if you're in the corporate world or if you're actually working for some of these, customer obsession. I'm like, even for nonprofits too, I think you have a set of customers, trying to solve for them is going to help. As you go through your career stages, that's what happened with me as well, is you focus on some of these leadership principles at different stages of life. When I started learning Go, for me it was learn and be curious. I had no idea how syntax worked. I had to learn it a little bit and then start building my own little prototype for myself. But once you know that, now if you talk about AI, I've been doing this for a few years, then it's about what is the value that I'm delivering to the customers and how am I actually delivering results for the customers is what I'm trying to solve for. And that evolution is what I think everybody has to go through. And if you follow those, and that's why I go back to the Amazon leadership principles, they're actually brilliant in terms of how these are thought about. And if you go through those, that's the journey that most of us will go through in a career as well.
Gotcha. Awesome. Yeah, I'll make sure for anyone watching, I'll put the Amazon leadership principles or link to them somewhere in the description. I think they're online somewhere, right?
Yes, they do. And they actually apply to, I'm like, you're a teacher. At home, my wife and I sometimes, she's an Amazonian too, so I guess there's that. But at home, sometimes we talk leadership principles in terms of that too. And this it's not just about Amazon. This is in general a trait that any professional or anybody else can go through as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Before I did this, I worked at Facebook, and even in what I do now, I find myself a lot of times going back to the big one at Facebook they say all the time is focus on impact. And in so much of what I do, I'm like, is this having any impact on giving some value to viewers or
Yes,
growing
absolutely.
the business I have now. And if it's not, like, why am I even doing this?
Yeah, I'm
really
like in your
good
case,
advice.
delivering this video, and hopefully, as people are watching it and they're learning and going there, and that's your customer base.
Right.
That's you're obsessed about what value you're adding to them, and that's exactly how all of us have to do it as well.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me. One last question is, what is the best way for somebody to get started if they do want to start using the Q Developer? Where should they go to find out more and see more of your work?
Amazon Q Developer, just look it up online. You can start within the IDE of your choice, whether it's VS Code or JetBrains. Install the extension and start using it for free. There is a free trial and a free version as well. Anybody can start using it if you're a developer. Now, of course, if you're already using some of the AWS resources like console and admin consoles, then you have Q Developer there as well. But install the extension and start using it right now.
Awesome. Well, thank you.